So one of the things I'm most passionate about is helping people learn how to think like a designer. And this came about because today you don't need the word UX in your job title in order to contribute to the experience, because today the experience is about all the touch points that someone has, right? It's about what they experience on the screen, maybe in store, the packaging, what they see on Facebook and Twitter. It's everything. And so I hope that you will get a little bit of a glimpse into the world as a user experience designer, but also challenge yourself in how you think as a designer. So first of all, I need everyone to do me a favor, and you have to close your eyes. Okay, now open your eyes and imagine that you have just won the lottery, 528 million, like these lucky people in Tennessee. Now, a question that comes up if this happens is, will you stay at your job? So, quick survey, stand up if you would stay at your job. It looks like about 50% or so. And Career Builder did a survey in 2014 about this very topic, and they found that 49% would leave their job and 51% would keep their job. And this was across a variety of industries, blue collar, white collar, et cetera, so it's pretty even. And the question comes up though, why would 51% of people stay at their job? So the survey went on to ask this very thing. And I want you to kind of raise your hand as I read through some of these reasons. So would you stay at your job if you were scared that you'd be bored if you didn't work? Okay, how about that your work really gives you accomplishment and something to be proud of? Okay, you want the financial security and you don't just want to rely on the lottery in case you blow it? Okay. And then how many of you would miss your coworkers? Again, pretend they're not here. Okay, looks like you all get along with your coworkers. So this gets to the idea of fulfillment, and that we as humans, we crave fulfillment. We want to belong, we want to contribute, we want to have a sense of achievement. But the thing is, what this survey found is quite different from what we sometimes experience on a normal week, right? So on a normal Sunday, if you weren't coming to an event like this, you might have a case of what I learned is called the Smondays. And this is apparently a real thing. It's out on Pinterest and Instagram. And it's that feeling on a Sunday when the anxiety of the week creeps in and you kind of get away from the relaxing of Sunday and start to stress out. And so this leads us to the topic of the paradox of work. And I learned about this in a book called The Glass Cage. And it examines this dichotomy. And in the book, it talked about a survey that happened at the University of Chicago in the 80s, where they wanted to study the effect of people's activities on their experience. And so they found 400 people, gave them all pagers because this was the 80s. And over the course of a week, the pager went off 7 times every day. And so 7 times a day, the people filled out what they were doing and how they were feeling. And the results were quite interesting. The results said that people were happier and felt more fulfilled by what they were doing at work than during their leisure hours. And the thing is, it's not just the job that makes us happy, it's that the job creates an environment for flow. Now, most of us are designers here, so you can relate to this, right? You sit down to design something, and maybe it's a struggle at first, but the next thing you know, an hour or two have gone by, you have no idea what songs have just played on your Spotify playlist, and you think, I have made the best design in the world. That's that state of flow. And there's a lot of neuroscience behind flow, so I'm not going to go too crazy on this. I was going to study neuroscience, though. But at the front of your brain, there's a part called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And this nasty thing is responsible for self-monitoring, meaning that voice of doubt, that nag, or we could just say it's the reason imposter syndrome happens. So researchers at Johns Hopkins wanted to understand the state of people's brains when they were in flow. So they used fMRI machines to look at people's brains, and what they found is that during that state of flow, that front part of the brain for self-monitoring, it is deactivated, which is crazy, but this is why we get into the state of flow, because you're no longer inhibited by fear. You take more risk, you're more creative, because that front part of your brain is not sending you all those negative thoughts. So I know that was a lot, but let's recap really quick. So we're happiest in our flow state. Flow happens more at work and less in leisure because we're actually not that good at creating structure and giving ourselves challenges in the same way that we're challenged at work. So now that you understand this love-hate relationship that we have with our jobs, I need to talk to you about robots. And there's this website called willrobotstakemyjob.com. Now, you don't have to go there, because I already have the answer for you. And brace yourselves. It's good news. There's only an 8.2% chance that your job as graphic designers will be taken over by robots. So we can all breathe a sigh of relief. But there's a little bit of bad news. And that is that automation is changing the way that we live and work. And we already see this a lot right now with driverless cars, with things in our homes that do things automatically, buttons you can press to order things, drones, et cetera, and our lives are becoming more computed and less human, for better or worse. And so today I want to explore these two ideas that are impacting how we live and work, and that's the idea of anticipatory design, which is about predicting people's needs and giving them great information and great opportunities to make choices, versus automated design, where we do things or we instruct our systems to do things on their behalf. So anticipatory design, I always like to say, if me as a UX designer, if I'm not anticipating people's needs, then what the heck am I doing, right? Design is really all about meeting people's needs, giving them what they want before they even know they need it. And so I think even though anticipatory design is kind of hot right now, it's already happening a lot around us. So we see this in flight apps, for example, where if I'm flying, either the day before or maybe the day of, Delta will give me information or actions that are anticipating my needs. It's related to check-in, or if the gate changed, or if the time changed, or something like that. And when I was eating lunch, I saw that Delta today pushed an update to their app, which now checks me in automatically, so now I have to change all this, but they are anticipating my needs. The next example is with search. So I'm Canadian, but I'm also American, so I can vote, and last year this time I wanted to make sure I could vote. So I went to Google and typed in, how do I? And before I typed in the R of register, it's giving me the options. So I clicked, how do I register to vote? And on the search results page, kind of before the 2.7 million results, there was this almost Cliff Notes voting module, let's call it, where it answered those key questions of, am I registered? How do I register? Where do I vote? All these things. It was anticipating my needs. Really helpful. Saved me a ton of time trying to mess around all the government sites, which sometimes aren't the best. No offense if you work on those. But Fast Company had a great article all about anticipatory design. And in the article it said, in the future, design around us will sweat the small stuff. And it went on to say that our lives are not made easier by all this anticipatory design, because it still forces us to make a decision. And I can see the point of that, because last week I had to buy laundry detergent. I live in New York. I could have easily done this, but I was busy, and so I thought I'd do it on Amazon and get it the next day. And I put that in, and I got 397 options for these little laundry pods, and instantly I was overwhelmed. I am using those filters at the left, seeing what comes in prime, not prime, looking at the reviews, seeing what I ordered before, all these things. And to be honest, I probably spent 5 to 8 minutes messing around on these results. And then I didn't even buy them because I was so overwhelmed. That's what I'm going to do when I get back tomorrow. But another example we have is with Netflix. So anytime that I have a little bit of downtime, I think, okay, maybe I'll stand and watch a movie. And my perfect vision of Netflix, if you work at Netflix, let's connect, but my perfect vision is that I go and they almost hand me on a silver platter the perfect movie for me. And that does not happen because I go to Netflix and I get 18 different movies right off the bat. And similar to the 397 laundry pods, I'm totally overwhelmed. And what happens for me is that I watch a trailer, I get out of it, I favorite it, and then I would say 7 out of 10 times, I don't watch anything because I get frustrated, or I watch the 2 movies that I probably watch all the time. So this is evidence that we suffer from decision fatigue. How many people would say they suffer from decision fatigue? Probably not even on a daily basis, on like an hourly basis. And there's a number out there, 35,000 decisions per day that we face. Now, I really tried hard to find the source of that, and I can't track it down, but it's widely cited, so let's go with it. But this decision fatigue is fueled because we are tethered to technology right now. Our phones are giving us so much information and so many decisions that we could make on probably a minute-by-minute basis. And I read I would say shocking article on Hacker News that took studies, 4 different studies, and kind of aggregated them. And they concluded that on average, every day, we're spending 4 hours on our phones, and 1 hour and 56 minutes of that is on social. Just those social apps, just those 5. That's not even taking into account Pinterest and things like that. The shocking thing is, over the course of your lifetime, this becomes 5 years and 4 months of time on your phones. And think of how much anxiety and how much decision fatigue that must cause us, and what are the side effects of that? So what can save us from this decision fatigue? In the article, it goes on to say, decisions are made and executed on behalf of the user, and that the goal should not just be to help the user make a decision, but to create this world where the user never needs to make a decision because it happens automatically and without their input. And so this is a little controversial for me, but I know this is happening, right? We see it with things like Nest. How many people have a Nest? So the Nest, it does things automatically. It's adjusting the temperature in your home based on your behavior as it learns about you. We also see this in a lot of finance apps. There's a whole suite of finance apps right now aimed at helping us save money because we're not very good at saving money, but this app will do it automatically for us. So the way it works is that you connect it to your checking account, and then every day it saves a little money based on how much it thinks you can afford. So maybe today it's $5, maybe tomorrow it's $50, next week it's $150, I don't know. But it's doing it automatically for you. So these are great, but my concern is that will we take all this anticipatory design and automated design too far? And what would that look like? So go into this imaginary automated world with me, and in this world, maybe this is my calendar, and some magical system is looking at it, and it notices that I need to do a workshop in London. It also notices that there's no flights booked yet, so being the helpful system that it is, it decides to go ahead and book a flight for me, and has me leave on Saturday, come back on Thursday, has all my meals and seat preferences and things. And in theory, this would be good because knowing me, I probably would have taken 2 hours to book the flight because I would have been so overwhelmed with all the options. But it's not that great because I had a lot of other plans in mind that the system didn't know about, maybe that weren't on my calendar. So I didn't want to leave on Saturday at 7 o'clock. I wanted to leave on the last flight because actually it was my birthday and I was training for the marathon, so I had to run 22 miles. So I needed the last flight to recover and do a little partying. And then on the return, I didn't want to come back right after the workshop. I wanted to spend the weekend in London. So I needed to leave on Saturday, not Thursday. So in theory, this works, but quickly, all these problems arise. And so my question is, can technology really choreograph around all the little details of our lives? Oftentimes, all the details that are in our minds, right? And not explicitly on our calendars or explicitly using information that we've given the system. So I want to pause here and say, don't get me wrong, because I love the automation that I have set up in my life. I think I couldn't run my business and have my life be the way it is, because if I didn't have all the automation, I'd be doing a lot more tedious work. But I do think that we cannot and probably should not automate everything. And so I want to leave us with 3 cautions to think about, and also 3 design principles that we can consider as we inevitably move into designing more around experiences that have anticipatory design and automated decisions. So the 3 cautions: first of all, accuracy. What happens when anticipation is inaccurate or when automation fails? And we can look to aviation for a great example. So we all know planes are flying themselves, but what I didn't know until I read this book, The Glass Cage, is that planes on average are flown by the pilot for only 3 to 4 minutes out of each flight. So you can think about that as you go home. But I had no clue. And what's interesting is that the less pilots are flying, the less they're using their flying skills. And this leads to something called de-skilling, where just like muscles, when you're not using your muscles, they're not as useful. When the pilots are not flying the planes as much, they're losing those piloting skills. And the FAA actually realized that in 10 years, from 2000 to 2010, 2/3 of crashes could be attributed to pilot error. And one example of this is from 2009, Air France flight 447. It was going from Rio to Paris. It was bad weather. They knew that going in, and they got up into the air, encountered the weather, and what happened was some of the instrumentation got really, really iced over, which resulted in the autopilot disconnecting. So the pilots had to step in, and the main pilot, he was like on a break in some other part of the plane, so this other combination of pilots were there. Now, my basic physics knowledge after reading this article, the plane was going long, hit the weather, autopilot disengages, and so then the pilot took the throttles and pulled them back. And what that did was it made the plane go up, and then like a roller coaster, it stalled out, and it went down at 10,000 feet per minute. And we know what happened, everyone perished. And in the report that the French equivalent of the FAA did, they said that it could be attributed to a total loss of cognitive control of the situation and loss of physical control of the airplane. In other words, de-skilling. So one thing to think about is if automation fails, can the user come in and course correct? And this is an extreme example, but it's important to consider what are the consequences. The second caution is around innovation, and if we automate too much, where will new ideas come from? Because we as people, we're always looking for ways to improve, to do things faster, for cheaper, more efficiently, and we see this in the automotive industry where Toyota spent a lot of time and a lot of money investing in robots for their factories. But they recently put people back into the factories, and after doing that, they ended up decreasing production line in some areas by 96%, and that must have led to amazing changes in finances and efficiencies and all kinds of things. And so the question really is for us, machines can do things over and over and over, which is great, but they're not looking out for those improvements of innovation, and we can do things over and better. So if we're going to automate a lot of things, we need to think about where can we put opportunities in for us to check in with the system, to give feedback, to be that second set of eyes, maybe the only set of eyes. Finally, the human experience. Going back to the beginning here, what becomes of the human experience if we automate too much? Because we know that we find satisfaction in that struggle. When we get into that state of flow, it gives us happiness, it gives us joy. And so where will that source of fulfillment come from if a lot of our work and our lives is automated? And kind of a side note, what will we do with all the free time that we all of a sudden have on our hands? Will we put it to good use, or will we just be spending 8 hours a day on our phones? So will anticipatory design and automation rob us of this fulfillment? And the 3 design principles I want to leave you with really quickly are, first, transparency, because if we automate everything, in order to create a great experience, I think we need to be transparent and let people know what is being done and make it explicitly clear, because they need to be able to see that, but also they need to be able to easily take back control, or in some cases reverse decisions that we're not accurate. And so the financial app, for example, they do a really good job of this, because I can easily go back in and see every little thing that it's done for me. And I can go in and I can even text message with it and tell it to pause or change things, and it has that transparency. The next design principle is around curation. So if you recall back to Amazon and Netflix, they were trying to anticipate my needs and curate my experience. The problem is that people are quite skeptical of algorithms, and I've done a lot of research, kind of one-on-one user interviews. And one of the things that we find, especially in a commerce site, is that people don't trust the algorithms. When they see that module that says, you might be interested in, or people also bought, they know it's an algorithm, and they feel like they're just being sold to. So curation has to become more human, and that could be as simple as just being more thoughtful with the copy around these modules, but we need to aim for quality, aim for more human, and don't go for quantity because of decision fatigue. And finally, the idea of trust, and that if systems are going to make decisions for us, we have to trust them, because in order for them to make good decisions, they have to know a lot about us, and they can infer things about us, but we also need to give those systems information about us, and the only way that we're going to give it information is if we trust it. So whenever I'm designing anything, I kind of approach it with this idea of give and take. For everything that I ask the user, I tell them why I'm asking for it, or I show them maybe in the next step or two why I asked for it and how I'm putting it to use to make their experience better. So as you think about that balance between anticipating people's needs and automating and making their decisions for them, it's important to consider these cautions and also these design principles. And one question that I think we should all ask ourselves is, are we doing this based on necessity or novelty? If we have the opportunity to make decisions for people, are we doing it kind of because of technology for the sake of technology? Or is it really the right decision for the experience, for the person? And I want to leave you with this. There was an article in the New York Times called Solving All the Wrong Problems. And it started off with a huge list of startups that the author had heard about out in San Francisco. And just a couple of them were a smart button to alert you if your zipper is down, an app to analyze the quality of your French kissing, and a sensor to let you know when you should change your child's diaper, among others, right? And the question and the premise of the article was, if the most fundamental definition of design is to solve problems, why are so many people devoting themselves to solving problems that really don't exist? So I want to leave you with this challenge that we have a responsibility to solve problems, but also not to create bigger problems. So in the decisions that you make, are you maybe solving a short-term problem for the user, but creating a longer-term problem down the road? Are you robbing them of innovation? Are you robbing them of experience? So thank you, and if you are curious about this, I'm going to have the slides and links to the survey or studies and books and all that at this link, so thanks.
All right, I'm from the Bay Area, so I'm also interested in this concept of solving the wrong problem, because I see that in the startup culture all the time.
Yes.
So you get hired by companies.
Yep.
And I'm sure that a couple of them are solving the wrong problem, or you get
many.
And so how do you assess that? How do you say no
Yep.
when it's really something that isn't of value to you? Talk us through one of these branching diagrams
Right.
of how you decide.
So 2 examples really come to mind. Like you said, I have clients that approach me all the time, and my first question to them is really, how do you know people want this? And I try and understand, have they done any research? What have they done to validate this idea? And oftentimes the answer is, well, my friend thinks it's a good idea, or my sister says she would use it. I even had one guy building something related to children, but he didn't have any children, and he thought he was the user. So it's always a challenge, but sometimes if they've not validated their idea, and they accept my proposal to do research, I will go and do research. And sometimes that research says, no, you shouldn't build this.
Right.
And that's when you have to really be sensitive to the founder or the client and figure out how to deliver them this bad news. And one example would be this one company wanted to build a huge content site. And the whole time we were doing research, I was thinking, nope, this is not a good idea. And the research ended up revealing that. And so instead of just going back to them and saying no, my team and I, we came up with like a MVP version of what they could do, so they
Minimum
could
viable
build something.
products. Is that
Yeah.
what MVP? Okay.
Yeah, so they could build something, and maybe that little miniature product would be enough.
Right. Do you ever get caught up in their excitement for their thing, even though it might be kind of an unnecessary thing?
Yeah, I would say at this point in my career, no. Because I see so much of that, and to that article that I spoke about, and just so many of the ideas that I hear about because I'm in the bubble, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess I'm a little jaded, and I just think like, does this really need to exist?
Yeah.
And I am at the point where I'm not afraid to tell people if I don't think it is, and challenge them and encourage them to do that research.
Right. I think I'm too jaded at this point. Even useful things, I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think so.
Yes.
I'm really interested in this idea of the automation paradox and this de-skilling. I mean, we did a story on the radio show, 99% Invisible, about the children of Magenta, which is like the pilots who used the instrument panel to fly rather than what they see, for example. And they kind of lost a lot of their skills because they only follow this automation. I mean, obviously, the airplane example is like the worst case scenario for this sort of thing. But what are the ways that we would encounter this in everyday life? There's de-skilling in all kinds of ways. Like, I don't know how to do what most people in this room know how to do. So how do what is useful de-skilling so that there's specialization, and what is sort of like the ones that are more dangerous to you?
So I think a big example related to our field right now is this obsession with software in design, and plugins and shortcuts and prototyping tools and all these things. And it puts the focus on deliverables and less about the strategy. So when I'm working on something, I often say to, especially with students, I say, we're not coding anything, we're not designing anything for the first X number of weeks, because we want to be in exploration mode and strategy mode, and we don't want to jump into the building phase, because once you jump into the build or design phase, you're automatically sucked into the weeds of what color, what font, is the button round, is it square, all these details, right? And so I think that these tools that maybe let us get to the deliverable faster are not the best, because it's robbing us of that strategy and thinking and brainstorming time.
Right. Well, I've never really thought about that way. So that the slow way to do it, it just gives you some time to think about, why am I drawing this button at all?
Exactly, because so many people come to me with, they come with 100 pages of wireframes or something. And I just think, they should have not done this much work.
There should be 100 pages of research.
If they'd only kind of come to me 3 months ago, we could have put some strategy around this instead of just crank out every single screen of the experience.
Right. Well, that's very interesting. All right. Sarah Doody, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Okay. This way? Okay. enjoyed this.